I say, why should we be subsidizing Canada? It's wonderful. I have so many friends in Canada. It's a great place.
Is there a concession you're looking for, sir?
No, we're not looking for a concession.
Tonight, Donald Trump says nothing can stop it. U.S. tariffs are coming on Canadian goods.
The president will be implementing tomorrow a 25% tariffs.
The devil's in the details, and the details are murky. But Canada says it's ready to punch right back.
There would be a first round of measures, a second round of measures, and a third round of measures.
In communities across Canada, the worry is for family, friends, and jobs.
This is going to snowball and affect all of our industries, all of our sectors. It's terrifying.
Those sectors include oil and gas, a softer hit, but no exemption.
This one's going to hit us in the pocketbook, provincially.
So tariffs are coming, and longtime allies are on the verge of a trade war.
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Thanks for joining us. Weeks of threats and mounting uncertainty have come to this. One of the largest free trade relationships in the world is about to break down. Donald Trump says nothing will stop the tariffs. He appeared to confirm that 25% tariffs on Canadian goods will kick in tomorrow. Said they might even go higher, though Canadian oil would get a bit of a break, but not an exemption. Ottawa has promised retaliation, and so decades of economic integration and cooperation may instead devolve into a full-blown trade war. We have complete coverage tonight from our correspondents lined up, how Canadian businesses across the country are bracing for what's coming, and how Ottawa is responding. But first, we go to Katie Simpson in Washington. So, Katie, in some ways, I suppose there's actually a very clear signal from Washington today.
The White House says definitively tariffs are coming. It's news that hurt markets and the Canadian dollar, even as some of the specifics and the reasoning appear to be fluid.
Good afternoon, everybody.
It was the White House press secretary who would be the one to officially deliver the news so many in Canada have dreaded.
The president will be implementing tomorrow a 25% tariffs on Mexico, 25% tariffs on Canada, and a 10% tariff on China for the illegal fentanyl that they have sourced and allowed to distribute into our country.
The United States is very lucky.
But the president suggested it's about more than border security, complaining about trade deficits, claiming unfair treatment, saying there's nothing anyone can do to stop it.
No, nothing. Not right now. We're not looking for a concession, and we'll just see what happens.
Donald Trump suggested tariffs may be staggered with different rates and dates for different products, including Canadian oil.
I'm probably going to reduce the tariff a little bit on that. We think we're going to bring it down to 10% on the oil.
And he singled out a wide range of industries, broadly promising a lot of tariffs on steel and aluminum.
This is the first salvo in a trade war. In one single motion, putting these tariffs on Canada, he is going to make things much more expensive for American voters. It makes no sense.
The North American supply chain is deeply integrated, with billions of dollars in trade per day. American importers typically pass tariffs on to consumers, making life more expensive. It's a worry of Republican Senator Susan Collins, who says, "I am working with the Trump administration to help its officials better understand the potential ramifications." And on that point, Trump seemed to offer a contradictory message to the voters who supported him because of his promise to make life more affordable.
Tariffs don't cause inflation, they cause success. They cause big success. So we're going to have great success. There could be some temporary short-term disruption, and people will understand that.
Well, this is the most specific Donald Trump has been about tariffs, Adrian. No one is going to know exactly what this all means until there's some kind of order, actual written words outlining the scope and scale of tariffs.
So, Katie, from what you can tell in Washington, how are sort of average working Americans interpreting this?
Well, this kind of story, it gets more attention outside the U.S. than it actually does domestically. And given the horrific plane crash in D.C. and the significant changes the Trump administration is implementing at home, this might not get too much attention until people notice the cost of everyday goods going up.
All right. Katie Simpson in Washington, thank you.
Thanks.
We turn to Ottawa now, where Ashley Burke shows us that even though the details are murky, the government says it's poised to respond.
Illegal crossings.
Before Donald Trump said there's nothing Canada can do to stop him, the Prime Minister warned he can strike back.
If the president does choose to implement any tariffs against Canada, we're ready with a response. A purposeful, forceful, but reasonable, immediate response.
Justin Trudeau met with his U.S.-Canada Council, experts helping him stand up to Trump.
We have a president in the United States that is determined to get money wherever he can, determined to exert his power however he can.
These tariffs could be crippling for our economy.
Ministers spent another day in Washington making Canada's case again to U.S. officials, but they still don't know if tariffs are actually coming into force on Saturday.
I wish I could answer that question, but the reality is we have yet seen a piece of paper declaring that. And of course, President Trump has made many different declarations, which we take very seriously.
Canada also worked on $1 billion border security plan, but it hasn't made Trump's threats go away.
As frustrating as it can be seen that these things may be seen to be done in vain, we absolutely have to try.
The Foreign Affairs Minister says if Trump goes ahead with unjustified tariffs, Canada will be ready on day one.
There would be a first round of measures, a second round of measures, and a third round of measures. And so we will continue to make sure that we have a strong plan, and we'll keep ourselves also some leverage.
The Prime Minister's office says Justin Trudeau did not speak to Trump on Friday. While the Prime Minister is promising to retaliate if Trump doesn't back down, he's also warning Canadians there could be difficult times ahead. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
All right, let's go to CBC News Chief Political Correspondent Rosie Barton. So, Rosie, it is striking how unclear the Canadian government seems to be on all of this, even now.
Yeah, Adrian, in some ways, it's almost as though it's in the same place it was 11 days ago when the president first floated this, because it doesn't have the details. What it does have, of course, the government does have now, is a deadline of tomorrow to try and find out more about how this is going to work. If you want a sense of how challenging it is for the government to manage, you just had to watch that press conference that Ashley just showed us. 3 cabinet ministers in Washington after Trump's comments today appeared to be completely in the dark. And this was after meeting with some of Trump's cabinet secretaries. The ministers were convinced that their arguments were being heard and that people are starting to understand how tariffs will impact Americans. The problem is that it might be too late and Donald Trump might not be listening.
Indeed. And I guess we'll find out tomorrow. Maybe at least that's the expectation the White House has set up. Doesn't mean it'll happen.
Yeah, and will there be details? Will there be a memo, an executive order, something that lays out clearly the timeline, the percentage of the tariffs, the products involved? And if all those things are in place, then the Prime Minister will gather up his key ministers together and they will start to craft a response. They've indicated, of course, that that would include counter tariffs. How big and what they would target, what Canada will go after is not known yet. But they have those lists drawn up and they insist that they are ready.
All right, we'll see. Rosie Barton in Ottawa, thank you.
Thanks.
Certainly Canada's oil patch is reeling tonight. Instead of a hoped-for tariff exemption, it's staring down the prospect of a 10% charge imposed on American buyers of crude oil. The stakes, of course, sky high. Sales of crude to the U.S. reached about $120 billion in 2023, the most recent data available, and that was before the TMX pipeline expansion pushed export volumes even higher. Julia Wong looks into the economic chaos that the U.S. president said would be unleashed sometime in the next 18 days.
At this Alberta truck stop, the red-hot topic was the looming U.S. tariff on oil and gas.
So yeah, absolutely, this is going to affect on the ground people all over our industry.
Well, I think it'll affect obviously Canada as well as Alberta. It also affects the states, so it's a lose-lose.
Alberta is bracing after Trump announced Canadian oil will be slapped with a 10% tariff.
We're going to put tariffs on oil and gas. That'll happen fairly soon. I think around the 18th of February.
In 2023, the U.S. relied on Canada for more than half of its crude oil imports, and nearly all of it came from Alberta. Expect ripple effects, experts say.
Canadian companies probably are going to work on controlling costs and streamlining operations to ensure that if they sell a little bit less because of this, they have some other way to make up their financial projections.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has been doing a full-court press, meeting with Trump earlier this month, even bringing a Fox News crew to Alberta to showcase new border measures. But even if the lower hit on oil is seen as a win, this political scientist says it may be hard for Smith to take all the credit.
I think that for Trump, a 25% tariff on oil really did risk a significant backlash from consumers in the Midwest. The reasoning for the 10% might be self-interest on Trump's part rather than satisfaction with what Canada has done or with what Alberta has done.
She's facing economic contraction.
The tariffs will be a challenge for Smith, one former political advisor says.
If this happens according to the announcements today, then we can bet that that's the trajectory. Slower GDP growth, less revenue, more spending.
Danielle Smith says she's waiting to see the details of the oil tariff and will have more to say soon. Julia Wong, CBC News, Edmonton.
Well, the stakes may be even higher for Ontario, which ranks third in the world as a source of U.S. imports. The province says only Mexico and China sell more to Americans. Alexander Silberman shows us there's already a chill around buying what's made in Ontario.
Just the threat of tariffs is hurting sales at Conquest Steel. With orders to the U.S. grinding to a halt, several machines are powered down and production hours cut back.
It has potentially devastating consequences for our business.
The family-run factory employs a dozen people, manufacturing landscape and building materials. American buyers make up as much as 25% of sales.
So even with just the possibility of tariffs, you have orders canceled piling up?
Absolutely, yes. And you can see that we already have substantial amount of inventory that's currently stuck.
Up to 500,000 jobs in the province rely on cross-border trade. More than $250 billion of Ontario exports are on the line. Greenhouses, which sell 85% of vegetables to the U.S., could also see layoffs.
So if tariffs were implemented overnight, that would cause a catastrophe to the border crossing.
The provincial government is preparing to fight back. It's considering taking American-made alcohol off the shelves of liquor stores, restricting exports of minerals for EV batteries, even threatening to cut off power supplied to U.S. homes.
This would be a tremendously bad shock to the Ontario economy.
This economist warns retaliation would come at a cost.
I mean, Ontario is small relative to the United States, and I think that we should be realistic about that. I don't think it would be pain-free.
The steel plant is trimming production costs to try and avoid layoffs.
So these are all products you started making and can't sell?
Exactly. Yes, that's right.
Molu wants to see governments step in and support manufacturers.
This is some of the stuck inventory.
He hopes a silver lining in a trade war could be a new push to buy Canadian, if businesses like his can find a way to survive. Alexander Silberman, CBC News, Toronto.
Uncertainty over the timing and makeup of the Trump tariffs helped weaken the Canadian dollar today. Volatile trading pushing the loonie below 69 cents U.S. Senior business reporter Peter Armstrong joins us now. So, Peter, a lot here. Clearly, there's volatility in the investing world. That's maybe not news. But what about businesses? What can they do to prepare?
I mean, the fact is, Adrian, there's not a whole lot they can do, right? And that's why this ever-changing narrative around what's coming, when it's coming, who it's going to take the hit really does matter. You know, until we know what's being targeted and how it's going to work, it's really hard for any of these businesses to plan how they're going to react. And just look at what we've seen in the last week, right? Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent floated this idea of a more gradual approach starting at 2% and then growing from there. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said, well, we've got the tariffs that might come after we have all these reports in the spring, but what we're talking about on the weekend, that's just got to do with the border. It's nothing else. Donald Trump came out and said, we're not talking about the oil at all. It's not going to be hit by this. And then today, we're right back to where we started, and in fact, maybe even a little bit worse. So how, as a company, as a business, as a sector, do you even plan for that?
And what about the American customers of Canadian businesses?
Listen, I think that's really key, and that's where we've seen success before, right? Remember when Trump slapped steel tariffs back in his first term? The Canadian delegation went down and made their case, and we slapped retaliatory tariffs on orange juice from Florida and bourbon from Kentucky. But it was when American businesses that were hit by those U.S. tariffs went to the president and said, this is bad for us, that poof, all of a sudden, Canada was able to get itself an exemption. Right now, we're looking at where are those flashpoints. ExxonMobil has a refinery in Illinois, for example, that uses 96% Alberta oil. Marathon Petroleum, another company, they've got one that uses 100% Canadian oil. We know how America's allies of Canada land on this. One last point, the Wall Street Journal published an opinion piece tonight, and I'm reading the title of it here, "The Dumbest Trade War in History," saying that Trump is imposing these tariffs for no good reason. We've heard that from the Canadian delegations and business groups, but it sounds a lot different when it's coming from the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, he'll love that. All right, Peter Armstrong, thank you.
You bet.
Turning to another major story out of Washington, divers are continuing the search for victims in the Potomac River tonight in the aftermath of Wednesday's deadly mid-air collision.
I believe for us to recover the rest of the remains that we are going to need to get the fuselage out of the water.
Paul Hunter has the latest on the investigation next. Plus, our continuing coverage of U.S. tariffs and the impact on Canada's auto sector.
Buckle up and get ready for a ride.
Ellen Morrow takes us to the heart of an industry bracing for the worst. And tariffs, of course, are also front and center in the race to replace Justin Trudeau.
We will impose retaliatory dollar-for-dollar tariffs.
How Liberal leadership candidates are framing their campaigns. We're back in 2 minutes.
You see the power of the tariff, and nobody can compete with us because we have by far the biggest piggy bank.
Donald Trump says his threatened tariffs are now just one day away, adding 25% to the cost of most Canadian exports. For crude oil, he's hinted he will keep it to 10% to be imposed by February 18th. Coming up, we have more special coverage on what this country is in for. Now to a developing story. Multiple houses were on fire in Pennsylvania tonight after a Learjet crashed and exploded in a densely populated area. So that's a doorbell camera that appears to capture that awful moment. It happened in a northeast Philadelphia neighborhood, the plane bursting into flames on impact. Officials say the crash occurred 30 seconds after takeoff. 6 people were reportedly on board, including a pediatric patient. The U.S. Federal Safety Board is investigating the crash. And in Washington, crews continue to work at the wreckage in the Potomac River, searching for bodies and answers after Wednesday's fatal mid-air crash between a helicopter and a commercial plane. Paul Hunter with the latest details.
On the tarmac at Washington's Reagan National Airport, it's now effectively business as usual, though helicopter routes near the airport have been curtailed. And out in the nearby Potomac, salvage operations and the continuing efforts to recover the bodies and body parts still caught inside what's left of the plane in that icy water.
So we're working as fast as we can. I believe for us to recover the rest of the remains that we are going to need to get the fuselage out of the water.
Meanwhile, more images emerge of the crash itself. On this new angle, after the jet and Black Hawk helicopter collide, the plane is seen twisting and turning as it plummets. On the big question, how could this happen? Investigators have caught a break. These are the cockpit voice and data recorders from the plane, all in good shape. And now as well, the recorder from the helicopter.
I can report to you now, we have recovered the Sikorsky black box. I can tell you from a visual inspection, we saw no exterior damage that would indicate that it was compromised.
Efforts to extract the data continue. This, as reports suggest, there's evidence the helicopter was flying well above the maximum allowed altitude for that part of the river when it struck the plane. Separately, U.S. President Trump continues to strongly suggest so-called diversity hires at the Federal Aviation Administration played a role in the incident, though he's offered no evidence to support that.
Good afternoon, everybody.
At the White House press briefing, Trump's press secretary defended the president's stated push for merit hires over diversity at the FAA.
When you are flying on an airplane with your loved ones, do you pray that your plane lands safely and gets you to your destination, or do you pray that the pilot has a certain skin color? I think we all know the answer to that question, and as President Trump said yesterday, it's common sense.
Trump's views on FAA hiring practices were again slammed today by critics, Adrian, as shameful.
And Paul, investigators obviously have their work cut out for them, don't they?
They do, but things are actually moving quite quickly. They expect to have the plane's fuselage out of the river by Tuesday, not least because the water where it fell is so shallow. Likewise, the helicopter is relatively easy to get to. And on those voice and data recorders, not only do they have them already, but confidence is high, they say. They'll get good data out of them. Meanwhile, the NTSB has already interviewed the air traffic controller on duty in the tower at the time of the crash. It changes little for the families of those killed, Adrian, but it may be that some answers on this will come sooner than might otherwise have been expected.
All right, Paul Hunter in Washington tonight. Thank you, Paul. A California man has agreed to plead guilty to recklessly operating a drone that crashed mid-flight into a water bomber from Quebec. The collision ripped a hole in the aircraft's wing, knocking it out of service for days. It happened earlier this month while the Super Scooper was fighting wildfires in Los Angeles. As part of a plea deal, the 56-year-old drone pilot will pay for the repairs to the plane. Well, the prospect of U.S. tariffs could have a devastating impact on Canada's auto industry, which is heavily integrated with its partners across the border.
It would decimate our community.
Ellen Morrow is in Windsor, Ontario, where anxiety is running high. Plus, new encouragement for Canadians to buy Canadian.
Send the message, buy Canadian products.
Lindsay Duncombe looks at why that might be easier said than done. The National breaks down the story shaping our world. Next.
As you know, we have about a $200 billion deficit with Canada, getting close to $200 billion. They've treated us very unfairly. And I say, why should we be subsidizing Canada?
Donald Trump confirming again he will move forward with tariffs on Canada as well as Mexico and China. Speaking from the Oval Office, Trump said there's nothing countries can do to stop it. So those tariffs are also a key issue in the federal Liberal leadership race. That contest now heating up with just 5 candidates left. Rafi Boudjikanian now with the frontrunners' latest policy promises and what they could mean for you.
Atlantic Canada was ground zero for pushback on the consumer carbon tax. It's where the Liberals exempted home heating oil.
I'm going to change it.
Now it's where one of Justin Trudeau's would-be successors has announced he'd wipe out the policy across the country.
You'll no longer have to pay more to fuel your car or heat your home. But when you choose an energy-efficient appliance or an electric car or home insulation, you will be rewarded.
But if that's a dramatic about-face for Mark Carney, he does still agree with the Prime Minister on tariffs.
We will impose retaliatory dollar-for-dollar tariffs if these measures are put in place.
The race's other frontrunner also came out swinging on the U.S. threat. On social media, Chrystia Freeland said we must hit back dollar for dollar, starting with 100% tariffs on all Tesla vehicles and U.S. wine, beer, and spirits. She's also promised to end the consumer carbon tax.
They think it's best just put this tool away.
This Liberal strategist says it's no surprise leadership candidates are distancing themselves from the tax.
Well, I think the opposition has done a really good job in vilifying it. And they're connecting it to the cost of living, to the affordability crisis, where there isn't any studies showing that that's a connection, but it has been permeating in Canadians' minds.
In a video released on Friday about Carney, the Conservatives made the point again.
He's announced that he will pause the carbon tax for a few months right before the election to trick people into re-electing the Liberals.
Carney did not say that. He did promise to keep the tax on industrial emitters, but has not explained how he'll prevent the companies from passing the cost on to consumers. Carney, Freeland, and the other candidates will defend their ideas in 2 leadership debates next month. Rafi Boudjikanian on CBC News, Ottawa.
And the federal government is delaying its plan to increase taxes on capital gains. A hike to the capital gains inclusion rate scheduled for June will be deferred until January of next year. The increase will see companies pay tax on 2/3 of capital gains. Right now, it applies to 1/2. It will also apply to individuals with capital gains earnings above $250,000. Well, now it's time to dig deeper into the stories shaping our world tonight. The border city preparing for tariff whiplash and buying Canadian. How easy is that? So with the looming trade war, you want to buy Canadian? Well, it's a little more complicated than you might think, and it might require some adjustments.
If you drink orange juice in the morning and you know oranges, well, we don't grow oranges, maybe you change to apple juice.
Some tips on how to do it and what to look for. But first,
we're going to bring back car manufacturing.
In the heartland of Canada's auto sector, there is worry on the assembly lines.
It would decimate our community.
Deeply integrated in the U.S. supply chain, the tariffs will have an immediate and intense impact in Windsor, Ontario. Ellen Morrow takes us to a city bracing for big trouble ahead.
Canada has been very tough to deal with over the years. They send us hundreds of thousands of cars. They make a lot of money with that. We don't need their cars.
Donald Trump's tariff threat threatens to upend the entire North American auto industry, an America First shakeup he's wanted for a long time.
They're stealing your auto industry. You got to stop it. We're going to bring back car manufacturing, and we're going to bring it back fast.
That all makes Windsor, Ontario, Canada's automotive capital, the epicenter of this possible trade war. Home to auto giant manufacturing plants and countless spin-off industries, all deeply integrated in a supply chain with the U.S.
The potential for tariffs is already disrupting the supply chain.
With so much at stake, we've come here to meet the workers with so much to lose.
I have 2 children that are 5th-generation Ford workers, so it would have a drastic impact on my family.
It would decimate our community.
I think I was hopeful that he was just maybe using it as some kind of leverage, but...
Are you still hopeful that it's leverage?
It's not sounding like it, is it? It's scary.
The auto industry drives everything in Windsor. More than 12,000 jobs directly linked to it, thousands more relying on a healthy auto sector. Auto parts made here can travel back and forth across the border multiple times, worked on by American and Canadian specialists before eventually being used in vehicles. The fear now, they'll face crushing tariffs on every single trip, a potential dagger to Canada's $50 billion worth of annual auto-related exports, most going to the U.S., and so much of them coming from this community. Windsor, a frequent stop for politicians since Trump's tariff threat.
We understand how integrated the economy here is in trade with the United States.
When workers lose their jobs, entire communities feel pain.
But no one understands what this community could be facing, like auto workers themselves.
This is going to snowball and affect all of our industries, all of our sectors. It's terrifying.
Christina Grossi and Kristen Lawton have worked for decades at Windsor's Ford engine plant.
I've had myself a couple of layoffs. My father in the 80s when interest rates went up high, and it's up and down all the time.
How does this moment compare to past difficult moments in the auto sector?
It's equally as scary. We have members in Windsor that were laid off for 7-8 years. Is this going to happen again? It's a possibility. We just don't know.
I'm worried about my members.
John Dagnolo is president of the union representing the city's Ford workers.
When they build an auto plant, they're going to build the parts plant around it. Now you have restaurants, gas stations, you name it, variety stores. Now we're doing a ton of construction in the community. It just goes on and on and on.
What does the future look like for the auto industry in Windsor if these 25% tariffs are put in place?
The majority of our community is manufacturing jobs. So I couldn't even imagine them, because future investment, they would be looking in another direction, I'm sure of it. At the end of the day, that's so important to our community, those jobs.
Those jobs have been Windsor's lifeblood for decades, the city's status as an automotive powerhouse going all the way back to the 1920s. Growing up alongside Detroit in its auto heyday, the city quickly became a hub for U.S. car manufacturers in Canada.
The nation and the industry are deeply dependent on each other.
In 1965, the Canada-US Auto Pact was signed, the first step to free trade.
We have concluded an agreement to expand our production and trade through a dismantling of tariff and other barriers in the automotive field.
That integration only deepening with NAFTA in 1994. The auto industry now operating as one giant North American system.
NAFTA is very difficult.
A system Trump has repeatedly attacked.
They've taken advantage of us for years. We lose jobs, we lose revenue, and they gain everything.
Trump renegotiated NAFTA, rechristened as the USMCA or CUSMA, in his first term, calling it a great deal then, but demanding another renegotiation during his 2024 campaign.
Oh, I'm going to have a lot of fun.
The agreement isn't up for official review until 2026, but a Wall Street Journal report claimed all of Trump's tariff talk is about making that happen sooner, to change automotive rules, forcing car plants to move from Canada and Mexico back to the U.S. Trump denied that's the motivation now, reiterating the tariff threat is about border security, but that's done little to assuage Windsor's fears.
We've seen him say things and do things that we never thought we'd ever hear from a president. So we assume that it will be a difficult road. Hey guys.
Jonathan Azzopardi runs Laval Tool and Mold, a family business since 1977.
We build molds for a variety of industries, including the automotive industry.
This factory, a symbol of the deep integration with the U.S.
So an average part before it actually gets onto a vehicle that you and I would buy can cross that border about 5 to 7 times. So I'll make a prototype part that'll go onto a fixture that's in the United States. It'll have something else done to it, and then that part will come back to me, I'll do something else to it, and then send it to the end customer to be assembled again.
Trump's 25% tariff and any retaliation from Ottawa, Jonathan says, would devastate his business. Desperate to avoid layoffs, he's already working on what he calls a Trump haircut to his profits.
We will reduce our profits to the point of losing money to maintain the relationships with our clients. It's really tough. It's a lot of stress.
What do you think the next 4 years are going to look like with Donald Trump in office?
Buckle up and get ready for a ride. This relationship, unfortunately, is going to be a great deal of stress, but we have to maintain that relationship because Canada really does need that relationship.
Windsor is one key example of that relationship, but the specter of Trump's tariffs is hanging over the whole country. So much so deeply intertwined, so much under threat now.
We're a family on both sides of the border. The impact would hurt both sides.
If you could say anything to Donald Trump as he's thinking about putting in these 25% tariffs, what would you say?
I would say he's looking at the wrong country. Without our minerals, without our aluminum, they're not building cars.
We've bought their vehicles. We've made sure that we bought their parts. So you need to support the country that supports you. I'm hoping that once he looks at the big picture, he will look at it differently.
And in the piece, we're talking about bigger auto plants and larger factories. But what's striking is when you drive around Windsor, you see the smaller places that have auto parts on the sign, Adrian, and the other businesses tied up in this. It's so obvious the impact this could have in that community.
And beyond that community, right? If we're talking about possible tariffs on the auto industry, it will have repercussions beyond Windsor.
That's right. Think about other places that have big auto manufacturing plants, Oakville, Oshawa. An industry group says that there are 128,000 direct jobs tied to auto manufacturing in this country, with at least 100,000 of them in Ontario. And one thing those workers told us is that regardless of what actually happens with the tariffs, is just all of this talk of them, this threat of them that's been going on for weeks now, months now, has already created so much uncertainty and anxiety in their families.
All right, Ellen Morrow, we'll all keep watching. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Coming up, in the face of these tariffs, many are talking about buying Canadian.
There's no guarantee that the things that it's made with, the materials or the ingredients, are from Canada.
So how practical is this strategy for consumers? Lindsay Duncombe breaks that down next. As Trump's tariffs descend, more and more Canadian consumers are looking to buy local.
Canada shines when it comes to agriculture. You can compare the Okanagan apples to the Washington apples.
So knowing your labels is a good start, but there is more to it than that. Lindsay Duncombe shows us how to best buy Canadian.
In the face of looming American tariffs, politicians are asking Canadians to shop at home.
Send the message, buy Canadian products.
When you're at the grocery store and you have a chance to buy a product right now, you're looking carefully at the labels to support Canadian jobs and to support Canada at this critical time.
So that when you go to the store, that Canadian pride leads you to buy that made in Canada product.
Canada has been very tough to deal with over the years.
Makes sense when your neighbor is threatening to cripple your economy.
The tariff threat has caused a buy Canadian sentiment that appears to be gaining momentum.
It's even kind of fun, but buying Canadian is easy to say, not so easy to do.
The reality is there's lots of goods Canada doesn't produce and food we can't grow, especially in winter. In order to buy Canadian, shoppers need to do research, make substitutions, and be prepared to pay more.
But it can be done, says marketing professor Surbona Dasgupta.
Okay, we're shopping on Robson Street. How do I know what's Canadian?
Up here we have Aritzia, which is Canadian.
Yeah.
The first challenge, understanding the label.
Even if you find something that says made in Canada, there's no guarantee that the things that it's made with, the materials or the ingredients, are from Canada.
Anything that says product of Canada is 98% Canadian. Made in Canada means 51% Canadian content. Then there's the big iconic brands.
We have a lot of Canadian brands like, Aritzia, Lululemon, Roots, but, it's important to keep in mind that they outsource a lot of their materials from other countries, even assemble them elsewhere. So you're still buying Canadian, and I think that's a good thing to support them because they have a Canadian footprint, but that's something to keep in mind.
It's all a bit confusing, but Dylan Lobo wants to help. He runs a website, madeinca.ca, to help shoppers find Canadian goods. It started back in 2018 when Donald Trump put tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum.
We essentially created a list, and it really caught on fire.
What has the interest in the website been in the last couple of weeks since this buildup of Trump tariffs has been?
Huge. I would say we received submissions that would have taken probably a year, that amount of submissions in like the last 2 weeks. That's hundreds of submissions.
So I asked our experts, where's the easiest place to buy Canadian? They said, start with the grocery store.
Canada shines when it comes to agriculture. You can compare the Okanagan apples to the Washington apples and make a choice to buy that, and it's pretty clear that they come from the Okanagan.
I'd say the easiest Canadian goods is to support dairy. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but the maple syrup industry is a huge one in Canada. It's probably the only one where it's so easy to get maple syrup for us, Yeah, those are the easiest ones.
But here's where you might have to make some choices. There are no orange groves in Canada.
If you drink orange juice in the morning and oranges, well, we don't grow oranges, maybe you change to apple juice or something else and support local businesses. And so making these small changes that become a habit with us means that we become self-reliant and more sustainable in the long run.
Another place where it's possible to buy Canadian? Clothing.
I personally, even the suit I'm wearing is from a local store, right? It's from a local tailor shop, yeah, in Etobicoke. So, I personally, I'm starting to support more on a local business level.
But here's the harsh reality. You're gonna have to shell out more cash for that Canadian suit from a local shop. It's true with many Canadian goods. Producing at home costs more.
Our labor laws, our regulations, everything makes it more costly. However, it's important to keep in mind that often the quality is also better. You pay extra, but you're also supporting Canadian business, you're supporting the workforce.
But we are in a cost of living crisis.
I know. My advice there is to say that you cannot be perfect in what you do, right? If you set yourself the goal of, I have to buy Canadian, then you're going to lose your mind because things are so expensive.
And some things you simply can't get. Electronics are out. Same thing with vehicles.
You can't buy a made in Canada car that's just made in Canada.
Yeah, no, it can't just be made in Canada. What happens is a portion is made in Canada, a portion is made somewhere in, Mexico, a portion is made somewhere else.
Even with those limitations, Professor Dasgupta says shifting consumption patterns could be a good thing.
It is important to be sustainable, to be self-reliant, and if we do that bit by bit, right, and it becomes a habit with us to buy Canadian, then we become more self-reliant.
Lobo says governments should make it easier for businesses to produce and sell goods here.
You can't just go on the news and just tell everybody, start doing this now. It doesn't work like that. I don't think so. You need to kind of build it up, right, over several years.
He sees this weird and scary moment as an opportunity. Changing how we shop could inspire a new generation of businesses made in Canada for Canadians.
I asked if buying more Canadian goods could actually have an impact, and the answer seems to be to a degree. Increased sales can boost local business for sure, but the Canadian Manufacturers Association says efforts to shop at home will not fully offset the impact of widespread tariffs.
So why is it that you think these Buy Canadian messages are just catching on, aside from the obvious that people want to do something?
I think that's what it is. There is so much here that we can't control. And the tariffs, the buildup, are they on? Are they off? Is Donald Trump joking about the 51st state? Politicians are dashing off to D.C. and Mar-a-Lago. Feels like there's so much you can't do anything about. But you can go to the grocery store and buy an apple from BC.
Or maybe pour yourself some of the Crown Royal I saw in your story there.
From Gimli, Manitoba to my glass, Adrian.
All right, Lindsay Duncombe in Vancouver. At the end of a long news week, something a little different when we come back. A world record for storytelling, the longest continuous ever.
Everyone was, are we gonna do it? We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it.
The woman who helped them pull it off in our moment.
CBC's daily news podcast, Front Burner, takes you deep inside the stories shaping Canada and the world. New episodes come out every morning, Monday to Friday. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube.
So you're looking at Kung Jade, an Indigenous storyteller from BC who helped set a Guinness World Record for the longest storytelling session at a festival in Morocco. So after hours and hours of telling tales, their unwavering commitment to the art and the success that came with it makes our moment.
80 hours, 32 minutes, 15 seconds.
There were 100 storytellers from 33 countries who broke the world record for nonstop storytelling.
Congratulations!
I'm in awe of this huge feat. And how many people it took to actually pull it off.
And then I put my big hand down.
Everyone was, are we gonna do it? We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. I was really worried that I was going to mess up somehow. It seems like such high stakes to mess up a world record. The theme actually was Baja. It means joy and healing. The different kinds of stories, they were absolutely magical. They transport you directly into another world, and it was wonderful. It was perfect. It was right on.
And then I realized I was squeezing Tommy's dead eyeballs.
Kind of an amazing tonic to everything else. So here's how it worked. There could only be 2 minutes between each story, so they got people to sign up around the clock. They did their sets, and then there was a rule that there had to be at least 10 people listening. And they pulled it off. From all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. CBC News will have continuing coverage this weekend of Trump's tariff threats on CBC News Network, streaming, and cbcnews.ca. I'm Adrian Arson. Take care.